Minister.
Madam Speaker, I move the bill now be read a second time.
The question is that the bill be now read a second time. I'll call the next member to speak in the debate. Member for Arafura.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Today I join my colleagues to speak on the Environmental Protections Legislation Amendment Bill 2025. Finally, an environmental related bill from the CLP government that I can support. The Northern Territory Container Deposit Scheme, originally known as Cash for Containers, was introduced 4 years ago under Labor. Since its inception, it has seen over 1 billion containers recycled and more than 100 million returned to Territorians. So the CDS has also created jobs, contributed to Territory's economy, and provided a valuable way for community groups, schools and charities to raise funds for their programs and activities. Madam Speaker, the CDS has helped keep our landscapes and waterways cleaner, our wildlife safer from plastic pollution, and also reduce the impacts of landfills on the environment. This is an important scheme, one loved by both the community and stakeholders. Now, with the inclusion of beverage containers of 3 litres or less in volume, such as wine, spirits, milk and juice bottles, Territorians and the environment will benefit even further. I want to thank the government for taking this Labor-led initiative to finish the line. This bill, Madam Speaker, is one Territorians have been asking for. According to the 2023 Improving the Container Deposit Schemes in the Northern Territory Consultation Summary Report, 90% of the survey respondents supported the changes proposed in the original Have Your Say survey. Some suggested improvements which included expanding the scheme to include plastic lids, expanding the scheme to include plastic containers that hold up to 3 litres, including wine, spirits, glass bottles, and harmonising the scheme with other jurisdictions across Australia. Those changes were committed to by the former Labor government, which began work on this phase of the scheme, and I congratulate the CLP for continuing that important work. However, this bill also brings a few concerning changes that I would like to raise. I hope the Minister can address them in his reply. This bill makes significant structural changes to the CDS by transferring authority from the Northern Territory Environmental Protection Authority to the Department, and by shifting reviews from the local court to the Northern Territory Civil and Administrative Tribunal. Now, I understand the intention is to streamline processes and align the Territory with other jurisdictions. That's great. We all want the scheme to be efficient as possible for all Territorians, but I am concerned about the practical impacts of these changes. For example, Madam Speaker, Anti-CAT has been handed a number of new responsibility alongside this. Will it receive additional funding and training to handle the complex legal and environmental issues that come with these responsibilities? What resources or support will be provided to the departmental staff? Who will now manage these expanded duties and disputes? The department is also inheriting compliance, licensing, and enforcement functions from the NT-EPA. Will those staff members receive additional training? Will funding be provided to ensure they can perform these duties effectively? Without proper funding, support and training, we risk losing the efficiency and responsiveness that the NT-EPA has brought to the CDS, which could lead to slower responses and weaker enforcements. Madam Speaker, I raise this concern not to antagonise or embarrass the Minister, but also to ensure that Territorians have the confidence that this government is carefully considering how to improve the scheme. I've mentioned throughout this speech that Territorians and stakeholders strongly support the CDS expansion. The Local Government Association of the Northern Territory, Legant, and the City of Darwin both praised the scheme and recommended its expansion into cities, regions, and remote townships so that more Territorians can benefit. And as someone from the bush who frequently visits the city, I would wholeheartedly agree. Unfortunately, this bill does not include the expansion of CDS into our regional and remote communities, and that's an ongoing discussion. This scheme is already reducing waste across the territory, and by adding more containers to the scheme, we're recycling even more single-use items. Imagine the impact if we were expanded into our regional and remote communities. This scheme is extremely limited in regional centres like Tennant Creek and is only up and running in a handful of remote communities through the shires. Expanding the CDS into remote regions is not just good policy, it's good for people, it's good for community pride. It will also allow remote towns to build local businesses, create jobs, and keep their communities clean, vibrant, and welcoming for visitors. Madam Speaker, I urge the government to consider supporting CDS in remote towns as well through targeted funding or grants so that community can establish new depots and collection points. This would help them participate fully in the scheme. Investments like this can give rise to recycling initiatives that fund breakfast programs, school resources, and community projects. The lack of expansion into remote community is a missed opportunity, and it is an opportunity to help close the gap and economic opportunity and community well-being in the bush. It also is disappointing the government did not include more collection points around regional hubs, as recommended by the city of Darwin. This would have been a small but powerful change, one that encourages residents to recycle, reduces litter, and keeps more waste out of landfill. Imagine a pilot program allowing residents in public housing to collect and redeem containers, with proceeds going towards shared power bills or cleaner gardens or even local community improvements. Madam Speaker, if the government truly wants the scheme to succeed, it must look beyond the cities and invest in where the impact will be the greatest. Expand the CDS into the bush and public housing neighbourhoods would create jobs, reduce waste, and bring pride and purpose to communities. Before I conclude, Madam Speaker, I want to raise another concern. This about process, not content of the bill. In the original Have Your Say survey, 90% of respondents supported the proposed expansion. So why was this bill sent to the scrutiny committee when others, like the anti-discrimination bill, were not given the same level of consultation? At a time when hate speech is on the rise, there's amendments deserve just as much scrutiny and public input. Madam Speaker, this bill is a good idea, one that Territorians clearly support. I hope the government in the next budget cycle commits to expanding into remote communities. Through funding grants, I know having access to depots would be a great opportunity for women's shelters, for schools to raise money for programs, create business, create jobs, and help keep our remote towns beautiful. Thank you.
Member for Goyder.
Madam Speaker, it's my pleasure to rise this morning to speak in support of the Environmental Protection (beverages, containers and plastic bags) legislation amendment expansion of CDS and other matters Bill 2025. Now that's quite a mouthful, Madam Speaker, but put simply, this bill means Territorians will soon be able to recycle and cash in their empty wine bottles, spirit bottles, milk cartons and juice containers in the same way we already do with our soft drink and beer cans and stubbies. Madam Speaker, the member for Breitling, my good friend, the Minister for Lands, Planning and Environment, must be running out of space in his 𝙏𝙈𝙈𝙋𝙎 for all the feathers he keeps collecting as he continues to kick goals. But I hope there's still room, as this is another feather in his cap. Perhaps he did this, and the timing is today, Madam Speaker, and perhaps this is the best birthday present the member for 𝙏𝙈𝙈𝙋𝙎 could have had, is to see more recycling in his community, which I know he loves. I see him quite constantly going down to 𝙏𝙈𝙒𝙋𝙎 Beach and picking up cans and other litter and tidying up his part of the territory, and I commend him for that. Happy birthday. Now, Madam Speaker, this is a reform that Territorians can raise a glass to, responsibly, of course, and never before driving. Now, before we look ahead, it's worth remembering how far we've come. The Container Deposit Scheme, or the CDS, is one of those great Territory initiatives that stood the test of time. What began in 2012, there was plenty of doubters. Some said Territorians wouldn't bother collecting 10-cent bottles or cans, and that the distances were too great and that it would never work outside the big cities. But here we are, more than a decade later, with over 1.3 billion containers collected and returned. That's 1.3 billion containers not being burnt, buried, or left on our roadsides. That's littered down, recycling up, and a whole new economy built on something as simple as a 10-cent cashback. That's the Territory spirit at work. A little bit of incentive, a bit of local ingenuity, and a whole lot of determination. You don't have to look far in 𝙏𝙈𝙈𝙀𝙎 to see just how successful this program's been. Across the rural area, the CDS has become part of everyday life. Litchfield Council collects cans and bottles at its 3 waste transfer stations and reinvests that money straight back into the community through its Cash for Cans and Community Grants program. This scheme has helped hundreds of rural kids attend sporting competitions, represent the NT and Litchfield Interstate, and participate in local events that they might not otherwise have been able to experience. Madam Speaker, I like to think that for every beer you drink, or soft drink if that's your preference, that you take to the tip, you put it in the recycle bin, it's a 10-cent donation straight back to the community. And if you'd rather put that 10 cents back in your own pocket, you can always come out and drop it off at the 𝙏𝙈𝙈𝙀𝙎𝙏 Regional Recycling on Spenceley Road and cash them in yourself. Now, during my time on Litchfield Council between 2021 and 2024, this scheme helped fund over 60 kids to take part in sports and youth activities, as I mentioned earlier, and delivered more than $120,000 in grants to community organisations. That meant that money went to things like the Rural Carols by Candlelight, the Darwin Community Arts, the new chairs for the 𝙏𝙈𝙀𝙎𝙏 Club, the barbecue upgrades for the NT Polo Cross. I know the member for Nelson, I've seen him quite often down there cooking up a feed on Polo Cross weekends. And stuff like the family seating for the Litchfield Bears Rugby League Club. And there was also a women's pre-season development program for the Litchfield Football Club, which I was great to see get up and increase their numbers. So all through the rural area, and especially in our sporting groups and our scout groups, you can see the money at work. These are real benefits, Madam Speaker, tangible outcomes that you see every week. This is why I don't need to go off the cuff, I've already written it down. Cubs from the 𝙏𝙈𝙀𝙎𝙏 Scouts of the Swamp Dogs have made collecting cans and bottles part of how they fundraise. I've seen kids out can hunting after community events and on the side of the road turning rubbish into pocket money and pocket money into pride. It's not just about recycling, it's a lesson in effort, reward and community responsibility. And Madam Speaker, I'd also note that even in this very building we have bins collecting for the Down Syndrome Association, another great initiative and community group that does fantastic work. And their bins are right across Darwin, and I know the member for 𝙏𝙬𝙬 will be talking about that a bit later. This bill builds on that success. It expands the scheme to include beverage containers up to 3 litres. That's wine and spirit bottles, plain milk containers, larger juicer bottles, and flavoured milks. In short, if you can drink it and it comes in a recyclable container under 3 litres, it'll soon be worth 10 cents to recycle. It might seem like a small change, but it'll have a big impact. Wine and spirit bottles make up a large portion of glass litter across the Territory, especially around public areas, rest stops on our highways, the side of our roads and on campsites. And outside of Darwin and Palmerston, there's no curbside recycling for milk or juice containers, which means too often they end up in landfill or on the roadside. With this expansion, we expect around 12 million additional containers to be recycled each year, about 2,000 tonnes of material that would otherwise go to waste. This means cleaner land, fewer injuries from broken glass, and more money flowing back into the community groups and families' pockets. Madam Speaker, one of the small but important changes in this bill is that collection depots can now accept containers with their lids, caps or closures still attached. It's a practical tweak that makes a big difference. Too often, people remove the caps, drop them on the ground or toss them in the bin, where they end up as microplastics or as landfill. By keeping the lid on, we keep the whole container intact and recyclable, no bits lost, no mess left behind. It also means fewer sharp edges from broken glass and fewer small plastic caps scattered across our parks, our gutters and our bushland. It's a simple change that rewards good habits and cuts down on litter in one go. When people return their bottles with the caps on, we keep those materials in the recycling stream where they belong. All those little pieces adds up. Tens of thousands of caps that used to end up in landfill will now be processed and reused. It's another way the Territorians can do their bit to protect our environment without extra effort or confusion. Every sealed bottle dropped at the depot is one less hazard on the roadside, one less item washed into the creeks, and one more example of a Territorians working together to keep our country clean and beautiful. One of the best things about this reform is that it makes the system simpler. Under the old rules, people had to remember what counted: soft drink, yes; wine, no; iced coffee, yes; 2 litre milk, no; juice, maybe; take the cap off; can I leave it on? No, you can't. Now you can. It was like playing a game of recycling bingo. This new approach ends all of that. If it's under 3 litres and recyclable, cash it in. It's simple, consistent, and easy for everyone to understand. Less confusion at home, fewer disputes at the depot, and more containers being properly recycled. And of course, changes like this will take time to implement, and this bill provides for sensible transition periods. Up to 2 years for wine and spirit labelling, and 1 year for milk and juice containers, to give producers time to update their labels and packaging to reflect the changes. Some businesses, during our consultation as part of the scrutiny committee, legislation scrutiny committee, such as the Australian Beverages Council and Coles, raised concerns about the timeline, but we believe it is achievable, and WA is doing something similar. There was also concerns raised about the potential cost impacts, since milk is a household staple, that it would put more extra pressure on Territorians. And my advice to those Territorians who are concerned about the cost of milk going up in this aspect is, if the cost of milk goes up by a few cents, recycle it and get your money back. For families across 𝙏𝙈𝙈𝙀𝙎, from Lambles Lagoon to Manton, that's an incentive that didn't exist before. This bill doesn't just expand the scheme, it also modernises how it's administered. At present, the NTEPA oversees the system. Under this legislation, that responsibility will now move to the Department of Land, Planning and Environment, supported by the Chief Executive Officer and delegates, and it's a practical change, aligning the law with what already happens in practice and freeing up the NTEPA to focus on major environmental assessments and impact studies. This will make decision-making faster, clearer and less bureaucratic. Reviews and appeals will move from the local court to NTCAT, meaning fairer and more efficient outcomes for everyone involved. Madam Speaker, in other words, we're cutting red tape instead of smashing bottles on the side of the road. During the committee's inquiry, both the Darwin City Council and Legant raised the importance of proving accessibility, and I pay credit to the member for Arafura for raising it in his speech. They suggested adding more depots, mobile collection points and hubs in remote areas. I fully support that vision. While the rural area already has a depot in Humpty Doo, there's room to make the scheme more accessible across the territory. And I can tell you, if we make it as easy to drop off your cans as it is to pick up horse feed, participation will skyrocket. The CDS has also been a quiet job creator. In the rural area, small operators have built thriving businesses collecting and sorting containers. They employ locals, partner with charities and keep waste out of the bush. These are territory businesses built on practical solutions, turning waste into wages and litter into livelihoods. Now, Madam Speaker, it was raised during the Scrutiny Committee's consultation and potentially in the original consultation as well. A lot of people asked whether it's time to double the refund from 10 cents to 20 cents. The Scrutiny Committee has recommended it be considered at the next review. It's a fair point. 10 cents a decade ago isn't quite worth the same as 10 cents today. Inflation has had its say, and maybe it's time the kids collecting cans got a pay rise. But any change like that needs to be considered carefully, balancing environmental benefit against cost to consumers and industry. Either way, the 10-cent refund has already proven its worth. And if it ever does increase, I can guarantee you there'll be a lot of kids raiding the family esky before mum's even finished her drink. The former member for Nelson, Jerry Woods, reminded us recently that the Territory was one of the first jurisdictions in Australia to stand up to the beverage industry and introduce a CDS. It took persistence and a bit of good old Territory stubbornness, but it worked, and now the rest of the country is catching up. We are once again leading the way, Madam Speaker, and in a few years' time, I'm sure all the states across across Australia will be following in our lead in recycling milk containers and 3-litre containers. This expansion isn't just about the statistics, it's about the difference it'll make to people's lives. More containers recycled mean less litter in our waterways, fewer broken bottles on our tracks, and cleaner public spaces for everyone. It'll also mean more fundraising opportunities for community groups. The 𝙏𝙈𝙈𝙀𝙎𝙏 Scouts are a perfect example. It's a great scout group in my electorate of 𝙏𝙎𝙈, Madam Speaker, full of wonderful kids who are growing up to be great leaders. When you've got 20 scouts armed with tongs and bags, you won't find a single can left in the park. Clubs like the Litchfield Bears, the Swamp Dogs, the Southern District Crocs that I've spoken about before have collection points at their home games that turns the cans and bottles into cash for their clubs. It's a simple but powerful idea. Small effort multiplied across a community creates a big impact. And Madam Speaker, the people of 𝙏𝙎𝙏 love their land. From the floodplains at Point Stewart to the farms of Acacia Hills and Lambills Lagoon and the bush blokes of 𝙏𝙬𝙔, Virginia, Bees Creek and everywhere in between, we're proud to live close to nature, and that means we see firsthand the impact of litter. I've seen glass bottles dumped along the Arnhem Highway, plastic floating in creeks and fishing spots, broken glass on horse and rural motorbike tracks, and I've said it before and I'll say it again. If you dump in the bush or throw a bottle out the window of your car, you're a grub. This expansion helps tackle that problem, not through punishment, but through positive incentives, rewarding people for doing the right thing. It's a win-win. Cleaner country, more recycling, and a few dollars back in people's pockets. It also supports the Territory's broader goals, promoting a circular economy, reducing landfill, and encouraging sustainable local industry. And because we're Territorians, we can also find a bit of humour in it, Madam Speaker. Some have joked to me that this reform will make us the fittest recyclers in the country, with all the bending over to pick up the 10-cent bottles one after another. If we can clean up the Territory, and I know the member for Casuarina gets his steps in cleaning up his beautiful beaches in the electorate of Casuarina, and many of my colleagues across the chamber here have done clean-ups in their own electorates, including myself, Madam Speaker, I do get out. Others... So if we can get a bit of exercise while we're at it, it's a double win. Others have asked whether backyard barbecues will now come with a built-in deposit return, and I tell them maybe, but you'll have to race the kids collecting them before you get your refund. Now finally, Madam Speaker, this bill is good environmental policy, good economic policy and good common sense. I want to thank the Minister for Lands, Planning and Environment again, the member for Breitling, for bringing this reform forward. It expands a proven program, modernises its administration and rewards Territorians for doing the right thing. It has been supported by the Legislative Scrutiny Committee, endorsed by industry after extensive consultation and overwhelmingly welcomed by the public, with over 90% of survey respondents backing the expansion. For the people of 𝙏𝙎𝙏, from the farmers in Mackay to the families in Virginia, this means cleaner roadsides, stronger community organisations and a more resilient recycling economy. For the Territory as a whole, it shows that we're still leading the way in a practical, down-to-earth environmental action. So, Madam Speaker, I commend this bill to the House and I look forward to seeing Territorians continue to cash in their cans, bottles and soon their milk and wine containers, keeping our beautiful Territory clean, green and uniquely ours. Thank you.
Are there any other speakers? The question is the bill be now read a second time. Oh, sorry. Member for Drysdale.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So I'm quite happy to rise to speak on the Northern Territory Container Deposit Scheme. And this is another measure for environmental conservatism that I think will greatly benefit across the Northern Territory. And it adds to the growing list of historic CLP achievements in this space. We actually can be quite proud as a CLP government of our environmental parks that we have created. And throughout the history, we can speak to Lemon Park, Lemon Bright Marine Park. We also have 𝙏𝙬𝙈𝙀𝙎𝙏𝘏, Charles Darwin National Park. And that one, Madam Speaker, we should be particularly proud of, as that we were the first jurisdiction in the country to create a park in its metropolitan capital. And I think that's a great achievement, and that actually set a standard for other states to follow, in that your high-density urban environments can still have protected parks. And so we should be very proud of that. And recently we've seen our government bring on Silkwood as well, which I think is a fantastic blend between both protecting the environment and also being open for families to go and enjoy. And that piece is very important, because someone like myself will use Silkwood, and that will ingrain in my children a love of nature, an enjoyment of nature, and those experiences go on to help ensure they will also be environmentally conservative throughout their life. And so I guess what I'm speaking to, Madam Speaker, is that the protection of the environment is not owned by any political movement. It is something we can all aspire to protect, and we can ensure that our environment is not only healthy, but it is there for future generations to enjoy. I grew up in absolute awe of Sir David Attenborough, and I've feasted on his documentaries since I was a little boy. And I still love any program he puts out. I enjoy going back and watching previous programs as well. And his body of work throughout his lifetime, which is just incredible, I believe it was 1951, his body of work begins, I guess, in media, where he brought the whole world into the homes early on, I guess, of the English-speaking world, and now today to the whole world, which shows his impact. But he brought nature into our homes, and I think you would struggle to argue if there's ever been a single individual that has had a bigger impact on creating the desire to conserve our environment, especially through the 20th century, and he's continued well into the 21st century. The fact that Sir Attenborough has 12 post-nominals, I think, speaks to what he's achieved. And we have the Order of Merit, Order of St. Michael and St. George, Order of the Champions of Honour, Royal Victorian Order, Order of the British Empire, and no fewer than 7 fellowships. I think that's quite an impressive record, and it speaks to how much society values seeing nature, enjoying it in our homes, and the impact that it's had. But he wasn't the only impact on me. Another strong impact on my youth was Captain Planet, Madam Speaker. And growing up in the 90s, Captain Planet was a fantastic cartoon, which, when I think of it, when I reflect now as a man, I do think had a strong impact on how I now view the environment and the need to protect it. There was a heavy focus in that show on rubbish and litter, and I know that's definitely shaped me today. But I want to mention another man in particular in my army career, and that is Warrant Officer Ewan Jack, who at the time was Sergeant Jack, and he was my first sergeant when I was a brand new young lieutenant. And I wrote a commendation for then Sergeant Jack on leadership, because he would, no matter where we were, and I mean no matter where we were, if we were doing PT on base, if we'd been on exercise and we were going to the movies as a troop, Sergeant Jack would pick up rubbish whenever he saw it. It didn't matter what time of day, what we were doing, he would always pick up any rubbish he saw. And I thought, as a young man in my early 20s, I thought that was just quite incredible, because it wasn't just the rubbish. He was setting a standard for the young soldiers, for myself as a young officer as well, on the standard we walk past is the standard we accept. And I just thought that was such an incredible part of him that I thought he deserved commendation for. And so when it came to my own electorate, those things inspired me myself. It's not news to anyone that rubbish throughout my electorate of Drysdale is quite bad, quite frankly. And when I came into this position, it was something I really wanted to tackle, because as a resident and as a local in that community, I don't want to see the huge build-up of rubbish that we are now dealing with. And it's not just unsightly. We have a huge range of native birds, which I really enjoy. We have a huge range of other native species, which already are under enough pressure with things like the cane toad, and just the urban sprawl itself. And so if we have something we can manage better, particularly rubbish, that's going to ease pressure on those native species, then I am all for it. We should be doing everything we can so that we protect, particularly in Palmerston, the few wild areas we have left. It's also why I do advocate for urban greenery. I think it's very important so we can maintain those levels of our native species so we can all enjoy them. So how are we going to tackle this rubbish? So I started off just picking up rubbish, huge amounts of rubbish. And there's photos where I have full ute loads of rubbish picked up in my electorate. Now, will Clinton Howe change the rubbish situation by himself? No. But I take that page from my first good sergeant, that if you can make a little impact and push others to do the same, you're just one more drop in that river, and that river can make the change. And so I particularly like this bill because it creates an incentive. It generally creates an incentive to go out. We have huge amounts of particularly alcohol bottles, and I think it's fantastic that we will now capture particularly wine bottles. We get a lot of, Yellow is a popular brand out in Palmerston, and there's a lot of yellow bottles. And so, creating now a financial incentive, I do know that's going to help, because we already have quite a few residents who go around and pick up all the cans, and a massive shout out to them, because it's a Herculean effort what some of them actually do. And I've gone and visited some of our residents who do pick up cans, and they've got like an entire operation going. Like, it is quite incredible. Yeah, and they're just fantastic community-minded individuals. Yes, they get to, there's a little bit of money in there, but I know all of them are they're not doing it for the 10 cents a can. They're doing it because it's good, meaningful work. It can create a little bit of extra money, which is great, or it can be donated as well. And so creating incentive in this space, I really like. And I think the Minister has done a fantastic job in bringing this on. We've seen a huge range of reforms coming from the Minister, and this one I particularly thank him for, because I just genuinely believe it's going to help. It'll help with the problem of litter in our community. Excuse me. Madam Speaker, I'd like to thank the committee members who partook in this. I was particularly keen to learn throughout this, and through our time in the committee, I think it was interesting to see kind of where we can land. My particular interest was how we can economically make greater incentive, and we heard about particularly aluminium prices at the moment. Aluminium prices are quite well, and I was very keen on the question of, will 20 cents make a greater incentive? I do think it's something the government, be it our government or a future government, whenever it's worth reviewing, actually having a look at, is the 20 cents worth putting on? And I will put forward to the Minister that I think at some point in the future that should genuinely be looked at. If we haven't seen the price increase for quite some time, and if aluminium prices are doing very well, then I think it's definitely something worth the government looking at sometime into the future. So essentially, I'm very happy with the bill. I'm really hoping we can see some improvements to the rubbish situation throughout Drysdale. We have beautiful native birds, a lot of small animals, and I'm really hoping this makes an impact. And I'm hoping it creates a cleaner, nicer environment where people can feel proud of being in Drysdale, because I want everyone to be proud to live in Drysdale. It's an amazing community, and I commend this bill. I commend the Minister for his work in bringing this on. I thank Sir Attenborough, Captain Planet, and Sergeant Jack for shaping me to eventually see the great worthiness of this bill. I commend this bill to the House. Thank you.
Member for 𝙏𝙎𝙈𝙋𝙎.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and it is important to talk about this, and I acknowledge the member for Drysdale thanking a number of people, but I want to thank someone who actually made this happen, and that was the former Minister and member for Stewart, Carl Hampton, who actually brought in the cash for container deposit scheme back in 2011. And certainly an important scheme for the Northern Territory, mirrored off South Australia's cash for container scheme, to enable and encourage, as we've heard in this very parliament, recycling, and to help people clean up their local communities, whether it is in the great electorate of Drysdale or whether it is in the wonderful electorate of 𝙏𝙎𝙈. Certainly looking at ways we could encourage community members, community groups and organisations to certainly get out there and play their part in making our communities cleaner, but also having an economic opportunity to raise funds for important community events and running associations across the place. So yes, it is important. I want to acknowledge that that legislation was originally passed in 2011, I believe, Madam Speaker. I think you were around back then in the good old days. And it certainly came into effect in 2012. It has been a really successful project. Today, the legislation is about tidying up and reforming and continuing to build on that successful program that was delivered by a former Labor government. Today's amendments are certainly very well received and encouraged in our community, tidying up the legislation in the sense that it's adding in additional measures that can be claimed for that 10 cents. Certainly lids and other containers encouraging to see. When we look at it over the past, historically, the program was very well received but has had its limitations, and practices change. We all know in our community that certain times the flavour of the month might be cans, it might be bottles. I want to acknowledge the amazing Alice Springs Town Council, of which I know myself and the member for Araluen both served on, and certainly the member for Breitling's father-in-law as the mayor. That council ran its own recycling system as well back in the day for glass bottles, particularly wine bottles. We know everyone doesn't mind a good glass of wine when they come home, but we recognised on that local council back in the day that there was the appetite for a scheme to look at that, and the local Alice Springs Town Council really led and was quite visionary in that space, in making sure that we recognised the need for not only cash for containers but for glass bottles as well, and offered incentives and a cash back for people who dropped those off. There are many organisations in the local community who offer those services. I think in Alice Springs in particular, There is a great business recycle bill. They give you a yellow bin and you can fill it up with your cans or your bottles and then they can either take it and they get to collect the revenue from it. People feel good because it's obviously about recycling as well. But of course there are bigger conversations as well from this legislation today about how we respond to and work forward around recycling. I know that on the committee we had a conversation around the amount of 10 cents and whether that should be considered at a later date to be increased or to be looked at. I think that's something that we should do. In a general principle, legislation should be kind of reviewed or contemporised every 5 years, so that might be something that the government of the day then look at and determine whether or not that's something that they consider. But I certainly know when we are talking about cash for containers, recycling and all those measures, it is something that is really, really important and close to many Territorians' hearts. Certainly would love to see the day when our local councils are in a position to be able to fund second bins, particularly at Alice Springs, for recycling. Because again, that's a great way to encourage and educate people around those practices. Want to absolutely acknowledge and thank the Secretariat staff for putting the hearings or the process of the committee's inquiry together. Certainly, as the member for Drysdale has highlighted, it was interesting to hear some of the conversations around the prices of aluminium and other materials and how they fluctuate and how they can have an impact in this space as well. I think if I could, I guess, just add any measure, whether it's the territory government, local government or the Commonwealth government, to really increase and provide an opportunity for remote communities to be able to access this important program in their communities would be a great step in the right direction. So I think at the moment we require people to collect the cans and the bottles and the lid tops, bag them up and then travel into Alice Springs, Tennant Creek, Katherine, Darwin or Palmerston. But if we could maybe work with our local councils and say, hey, can people drop these containers off for you and you reimburse them the 10 cents, I think we would find the standard and the tidiness of our local communities in our regional centres, our remote communities, our homelands and our towns certainly would increase. I heard this morning on the local ABC radio this morning, Madam Speaker, the Alice Springs Town Council talking about the 2 recycling stations that they had put in the CBD. The uptake of that is amazing, and it's a system where it's encouraging people to do it. They're not required to be inconvenienced of travelling out. They can drop it off on the way to work. Their bags of recycling, and I think that's certainly really exciting to see what we can do. I note that Madam Speaker was a topic of the ABC radio this morning talking about hard recycling and hard rubbish in Alice Springs, and that's something that the local council are looking at and the costs associated with that. But I think whilst that's kind of out of the scope of what we're talking about today, it's part of a bigger picture around how we respond to and work forward in the future around recycling so that we can look at doing that. I think, again, I'm going to just go back to Alice Springs. Great work there where they were able to recycle bottles, glass bottles, whether it was beer bottles, wine bottles, soft drink bottles, jars, crush them, and then they were able to start using those in roads and footpaths. So many of the footpaths in Alice Springs have foundations of glass bottles, so beer bottles, wine bottles and Coke bottles and so forth. So again, there's some really amazing opportunities we can do when we talk about recycling. But I absolutely want to say from the onset, this is a great step in the right direction. Expanding those provisions from the existing legislation is very welcomed, and we really look forward to encouraging all of our community groups to really look at the uptake. So, Madam Speaker, I hope that many members of the Parliament, like the member for Drysdale, can just be reminded of the importance of Captain Planet and recycling, because it's something that we all need to get on board with and do a better job and support initiatives. And I acknowledge that this is an important initiative building on the original container deposit scheme. Thank you.
Member for Blaine.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise to give my contribution on this fantastic piece of legislation today. And I have to say, Member for 𝙏𝙈𝙆𝙎, you did snipe me. I was going to go back into the history of this Act and say that, yes, Labor Minister Carl Hampton did introduce the original bill back in 2010. So well done, you beat me to that. People often ask me, are there any Labor policies that you support? Are there any good Labor policies? And I always scratch my head, and very often I can't think of any because, as was said in the House yesterday, the previous government for the last 2 terms was hopeless, incompetent, a waste of space, misguided, tin-eared, not listening, any number of things. But every so often, when you go scratching back through the dim, dark history, before most of those members of that government had any position of power, you do find the odd gem that actually is a good piece of legislation. And introducing the container deposit scheme is one of those bits of Labor work that I will say was a good idea. Not because it's in line with socialist policy and control of the means of production by the government, but just because, on the contrary, it actually aligns with liberal values of using incentives and thinking about how people work, how people think, what incentives they respond to, and putting a minor value on something that would otherwise be rubbish, and using people's natural bowerbird instincts to go out and collect up the rubbish that otherwise we'd have to pay people to do, which we all want a clean society, but we don't want, it would be better if people picked up their own rubbish. I remember being a student back at Bachelor Area School back in the 80s, and we would go off on our little emu parades. I don't know if that's something that still happens these days. I might have to have a talk to the Minister for Education about that, but when I was in primary school, we were regularly doing our emu parade. We'd go to the nearby park, we'd all hold hands like little ducks and walk off together, led by the teacher, and we'd go around and we'd pick up rubbish, put it in our bags, bring it back, put it in the bin. And that instilled in us the values of keeping our country clean. I remember being a kid back in the 80s. I mean, who else here remembers the advertising campaign, Keep Australia? How did... Member for 𝙏𝙈𝙎𝙎. But there was a theme song which I won't berate the House with, but it got into your head, all about keeping Australia clean. Pick up your rubbish, put it in the bin. And that was a value as a child of the 80s that was instilled deep in me, and I try to instill that in my 3 boys whenever we're getting around, when they're annoying me to eat some snacks and food. It's how important it is. Pick up your rubbish, put it in the bin. Don't let it, don't throw it on the floor. Make sure that rubbish goes into its place. So, this bill that was introduced in 2010 was actually, it was half good. The other half of the bill at the time introduced restrictions on, it criminalised shopping, Woolies and Coles using plastic bags. And by all means, I agree, we should definitely not, have plastic bags blowing around the place. Minimising the amount of plastic in our environment is a good thing. But every time I go to the shops and I'm getting my, milk and other cold products, and I put them in that cardboard bag, and then I'm carrying them out to my car, and then the condensation gets onto that cardboard bag, and then it splits, and I lose my groceries all over the floor, and there I am having to pick them all up. I sit there and I go, well, is this really the best way to do this? But anyway, I digress. So the 10 cents fundraising, as the member for 𝙏𝙎𝙎 talked about, it's a great way for our sports clubs and schools and people with a bit of time on their hands to get out there, clean up our environment and remove rubbish from the streets. I think that was a great contribution from the Legislative Scrutiny Committee. I think it would be a good idea to look at raising, I would support raising that 10 cents in line with inflation, just to make sure that the incentive keeps pace with increasing prices. That's nearly 15 years ago now that was introduced, so things have moved on a bit. You know, a can of Coke is worth a bit more than it was back in 2010. But I'd like to talk about all the community groups in Palmerston that would benefit from a scheme like this. Groups that get out there, they're always fundraising, they're always active in their community, and they're always looking for more ways to bring in a dollar to help them provide better services for their club, for the community. So the Palmerston Scouts, they've got a great scout leader. I know the Mayor of Palmerston, the Mayor Athena Pascoe-Bell, she's deeply involved in the Palmerston Scouts, and they're always out and about. They would love the opportunity to be able to make more money, bring in more revenue by picking up more rubbish off our streets. Palmerston Raiders Rugby League, very active, great part of the Palmerston community. So many families and kids are involved in that club. The more revenue they can have, the more services they can provide, the more coaches they can put on, the more gear they can provide to the kids. They would love to have more opportunities to pick up rubbish and get out there and put some money into the coffers of the club. The Palmerston Rugby Union Crocs, a great club. They've got their clubhouse in Malden, and they train at the Malden Oval, and I'm working to fulfil my election commitment to improve the lighting at that oval. I'm proud to say this year that oval was not burnt out, unlike the previous year under the previous government when they could not even keep the sprinklers on. There's much more work to do in that space. I'm working with the club president there. The current sprinklers do not fully cover the whole oval. So the Northern Sharks Rugby League Club, who train there over the dry season, they have some troubles. They can't run a home game there because there's patches of the ground that are a little bit hard if you get tackled on them. So they can't have a home game. I'm continuing to work on that election commitment to improve the lighting at that field so the Crocs can have their home games and run their Super Sevens. And for the Northern Sharkies, I'm working on it. I want that field to be green, wall to wall, throughout the dry season, so that you can have home games, you can train at night, and that you can do all that you need to do on that field. The Palmerston Crocs Netball Club, another fantastic local Palmerston sports club. Those girls are just mad about netball. I never played netball myself as a youngster, but they love it. So the more that they can get out there and pick up rubbish, clean up our streets. So the Palmerston Crocs Netball Club, they train at the Palmerston Netball fields in my electorate of Blaine in the suburb of Malden. They share that with MASH Netball Club, two clubs training on the same fields, and they have their home games there. It's a bit of a challenge when you go there for a big game, you know, a semi-final, a final, and there's all these kids running around in uniforms, and you know, you got to make sure they're both Palmerston clubs, they're both fantastic local clubs, but you got to make sure you don't get them mixed up, because there's nothing worse than congratulating them and saying, "Oh no, sorry, I'm not with that club, I'm with the other one." Whoopsie. But Palmerston Crocs Netball, MASH Netball Club, fantastic local Palmerston sports clubs that love to get out there, fundraise, and could always do with some more opportunities to fundraise. Palmerston Rovers Football Club, soccer club that train over in the member for Drysdale's electorate and the sports fields next to the Grey Primary School. They're a fantastic club. The member for Drysdale and I attended their junior presentation at the end of this season, and what an amazing club. They're just so passionate. They've got a fantastic president, and his name escapes me at the moment. But yeah, but they would love to get out there and take advantage of this scheme and pick up any of those bottles that have now come into scope with the increase to the 3-litre limit. And not technically but the GPUFC, Greater Palmerston United Football Club, So they often meet out in the wonderful electorate of 𝙏𝙈𝙈𝙀𝙎, which the member for 𝙏𝙈𝙈 is extremely passionate about. I wasn't able to make it to their end of year presentation this year, but I understand that the member for Brennan did. They are such a passionate club. I think they celebrated their 10-year anniversary just last year, I think, and they've grown from almost nothing, just a couple of sports fanatics who were just a couple of young guys who were just crazy about soccer, and they saw some the youth in Palmerston that had a bit of extra time on their hands and a lot of energy, loved running about, so they got together. And I think the member for Spilett, our now Chief Minister, 𝙏𝙗𝙈𝙀𝙎𝙏, helped them get started, and they've just grown and grown and grown, and now they are just absolutely kicking goals. They're a massive club, they're doing really well, and they would love to get out there and earn more revenue by picking up rubbish and providing more services to the community. Bottle caps. One of the things that I really like about this bit of legislation is it's bringing bottle caps into scope, so that if someone forgets to take the cap off a bottle, then it's not going to be a hindrance. So I remember when A Place for Plastic, who are based in the member for Nightcliff's area, they're a passionate local group who are all about recycling plastic, upcycling, reusing, reducing waste. They went out to the Berry Springs Primary School, and they got the Plastic Ninja students to dispose of a lot of old bottles. So they cut up old soft drink bottles and they painted them, turned them into planters, putting potting mix into them, planting things, painting, decorating, and they actually had an injection machine. So they got all the bottle caps that normally would just go into landfill, and they managed to put them into this machine, and it extruded them out and turned them into other things. So well done, A Place for Plastic, and well done, Berry Springs Primary School. Fantastic work. Turning to rubbish in Palmerston. So the member for Drysdale and I are incredibly passionate about having a great community that's a fantastic place for parents to raise kids. My dream is that parents in Palmerston, particularly in my suburbs of Maldon and Woodruff, and I'm sure the member for Drysdale would agree, Grey and Driver, my dream would be that parents can be comfortable and at peace, that the streets would be in such a condition, so clean, so safe, that parents would be comfortable and happy and have no worries with their kids walking out of the gate, walking down the street, in bare feet, going to the local park and playing on the equipment, running around the grass, playing in the sandpit, and coming back, not having to worry about broken glass or any of the other antisocial behaviour that really just got out of control over the last 8 years under the previous Labor government. So that's something that I, and I'm sure the member for Drysdale, will be fighting for every day and every day in this chamber. During the campaign and continuing, there is no end of opportunities for us to pick. Actually, since the change of government, it's become a bit harder to find rubbish. Last year there was rubbish everywhere. It wasn't hard, People were always saying, "Oh, there's a big pile of rubbish over in this park because these people are drinking," or "There's a big pile of rubbish over there because those people, there's drinking over there." And I remember on one day responding to a complaint from a constituent about a lot of rubbish on Emery Avenue, and going there with a couple of bags and my trusty picker-upper. And I think I filled up about 3 or 4 bags of glass bottles out of some bushes there, because there was a drinking circle which had taken up nearby under a tree. And under the previous Labor government, they had fully decriminalised public drinking. They had tied the hands of police, and they went out to the public and said, "Oh no, it's not lawful to drink in public. Oh no, we have the strongest laws." But the truth of the fact of the matter was, there were no consequences. There was no offence. It was a distinction without a difference. Under the previous government, it was technically unlawful to drink in public, but there was no consequence. Police could turn up and there was nothing they could do. They couldn't even ask for people's names. They couldn't even say, who are you? What's your name? Where are you from? What are you doing here? Because there was no offence tied to drinking in public. The previous Labor government had removed that, tying the hands of police, removing their powers, making them helpless in the face of antisocial behaviour in our community. And I think that's why they got turfed out so vehemently at the last election. And we've learnt that lesson. We gave police back their powers. We made sure that there's an offence tied to public drinking. And for those who may hear what I'm saying and may tisk and roll their eyes, it's really important to have things like this in legislation, because what happens when there's an offence tied to something, it actually activates police powers. It actually empowers them to then take action. If there's no offence, then police are hamstrung. And so when there's a group of people drinking unlawfully in a park, in a public place, in a place where families, where mothers would love to take their children and go there and, let their kids play in the grass. I mean, I remember when my kids were little, and, when they were babies or toddlers, there was nothing better than getting out of the house, going down the park, sitting down, having a rest, and letting the kids run around, on the grass in the sandpit. But the trouble is, when when the police's hands are tied, when the law enforcers are chained, then criminals are free. Antisocial behaviour moved in, the drinking circles multiplied, and there was nothing that police could do. So I'm proud to be a member of a government that said, no, the community expectation is that parks and public spaces should be a safe place for mothers, children, families to go to and enjoy, for parents to relax while their kids can run around and play. We put back the offence on drinking in a public place so that police have powers to ask people who they are, and if they have a warrant outstanding, if there's a bail condition or a domestic violence order in place that says this person's not allowed to drink in the company of this other person, that's actually a safety measure. It's very common when a domestic violence order is placed where there's assault due to intoxication from alcohol. It's very common to have because you might have two people who actually love each other and they have a very complicated relationship, but when one or both of them are intoxicated, then they lose their inhibitions and they behave in ways that the sober version of themselves would not approve of. And so it's very common to have, on a domestic violence order, a condition to say that this person cannot drink in the company of that person. And when police don't have powers, when there's not an offence tied to unlawful drinking, then police have no power to ask who someone is. If they don't know who they are, how are they meant to protect the woman in that situation from her partner who may be drinking and not himself? And that could lead... I know the member for Drysdale was deeply impacted by the death of a woman in his electorate recently. And it's alleged in the media that alcohol was involved in that circumstance and that it progressed. We need to do everything possible to protect women in the Northern Territory. We need to do everything possible to protect women in the Northern Territory and keep children safe. Obviously, there's still more to do, and we will continue. The job is not done yet. We will continue to work. We will continue to act. Now, another aspect that's positive about removing bottles from our community is if bottles are lying around, they're often used as weapons. Many times I saw broken, smashed glass from bottles is just a constant problem in my electorate. And when I talk to people and say, why do you smash bottles? Why do you do that? You know, like, just, can you put it in the bin? And they say, well, if I leave the bottle there, even if I put it in the bin, it might get used as a weapon against me later. Whereas if I smash it into pieces, it can't be used as a weapon against me. And so it's done on purpose, you know, and it's a safety measure by people who are in a very difficult circumstance and who need help. So in bringing those bottles into the scope of this legislation is really important because that provides an incentive for people to remove those bottles without having to have them smashed. You know, we've all seen, I don't know these guys, but I see them on the side of the road. They're riding around on their bikes and they have a little, you know, the baby bike trailer, trailing behind them. And they have the biggest bags of cans behind them. It is just absolutely amazing. And I tell you what, I take my hat off to those people because they work so hard running around collecting those 10 cents. It is an absolute honour to them that they are working so hard to keep our community safe, our community clean, and pick up all those bottles. And I look forward to all of those community groups that I mentioned, the Good Samaritans in the community, the people who are just running around, you know, responding to their natural incentives, chasing the 10 cents, you know, maybe hopefully 15 cents in the future, maybe 20 cents, who knows, and picking up all those bottles so that they don't have to be smashed, so that, you know, the women in my electorate who are living in difficult circumstances don't have to be afraid that those bottles will be used as a weapon against them later that night. And while I'm here, I would like to give a shout out to Trevor Jenkins, the garbage warrior, who really set the standard so many years ago by just, you know, he got a personal mission. I'm not sure what motivated him, but he made a decision himself to get out there and become a one-man clean-up band. And I don't think he made any money out of it. He would just get out there and, you know, pick up all the rubbish, and if a bin was too far away, he'd put it in one place so it was easy for the council to come along and pick it up. So thank you, Trevor, for all your hard work over the years picking up rubbish. We appreciate it. And before I finish up, I'd just like to round off on where I started, which is on the liberal values of incentives guiding behaviour rather than the socialist tendency to use the heavy hand of punishment. So when you look at behaviour that, you know, humans have a nature. Socialists always want to rule by control and punishment, you know, and they're not happy until they can enforce thought crime. And that's something that we're seeing around the world right now, where speech is being controlled, where language is being controlled. And that's the natural endpoint of those on that side. So that is the natural tendency. But for the liberals in the world, they seek to let people be free, let the marketplace of ideas flourish. They're not afraid of free speech. They're not afraid of people speaking their mind. And I pick up on the comments, I pick up on the head rolling, I pick up on the eye rolling, but it's true. And you're reacting because you feel that it's piercing your heart. You're feeling convicted. I pick up on the laughter from the member for Johnston. I pick up on the laughter from the member for Nightcliff, right? You're reacting because you're feeling convicted, right? You know that you would love nothing more than to control people's speech, nothing more than to control what people think.
Member for Blaine, can you direct your comments through me, please?
Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Member for Johnston.
Thank you. But I pick up on those interjections. And moving on, I note that in opposition to liberal values of free speech, letting the marketplace of ideas flourish, letting, if someone has a silly thing to say that some may find offensive, then they should be punished in the marketplace of ideas. They should face the consequences of what they've said. We should not seek to control their speech unless they directly incite violence. So this bill seeks to work with the natural incentives of people to get out there, pick up rubbish, bring it into a recycling depot and clean up our community. And Madam Speaker, I thank the Minister and I commend this bill to the House.
Member for Wanguri.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise to speak in strong support of the Environment Protection, Beverage Containers and Plastic Bags Legislation Amendment, expansion of the CDS and Other Matters Bill 2025. This bill actually strengthens one of the Northern Territory's greatest environmental and community success stories, our container deposit scheme, known to Territorians as Cash for Containers. It's a program that rewards environmental responsibility, supports local businesses and creates meaningful employment and social inclusion across the Territory. I am proud to note that this bill enjoys bipartisan support and was referred to the Legislative Scrutiny Committee with no amendments, a clear reflection to our shared commitment to sustainability, community and opportunity for all Territorians. Madam Speaker, this bill expands the scope of the container deposit scheme to include beverage containers of 3 litres or less. For the first time, capturing wine and spirit bottles, plain milk containers and larger juice and flavoured milk bottles. This expansion will prevent millions of additional containers from ending up in landfill or littering our beautiful environment, while also increasing recycling and resources across the Territory. Madam Speaker, the Container Deposit Scheme is more than just an environmental initiative. It's an economic driver and a social enterprise success story. Across the Territory, depots provide employment and training for hundreds of people, jobs that can't be outsourced and that strengthens local communities. Madam Speaker, depots across the Territory provide income, skills, pathways for Territorians of all ages and abilities. Every time a container is returned, it supports local jobs and small businesses, and the expansion of the scheme means greater opportunities in every part of the Northern Territory. Madam Speaker, I also proudly want to say one of the best examples of the Container Deposit Scheme community impact can be found at the Down Syndrome Association of the Northern Territory's depot in Leanya, operated under the name Cash for Containers, C4C. C4C is a social enterprise that offers growing employment opportunities for young people with disabilities. Through the Northern Territory Government's Cash for Recycling scheme, Cash for Containers has built a workplace that continues environmental sustainability with social inclusion. The program provides casual employment for over a dozen people with disabilities, each contributing to the daily operations. They're sorting, counting, serving customers and learning workplace skills that foster independence and confidence. The participants also collect the containers, and I know the team who drive around the Darwin and Palmerston area look forward to those daily trips. For many participants, this is their first job, a first step into the workforce and a chance to earn a wage, gain skills and contribute to the community. And Madam Speaker, I want to take a moment to acknowledge Kyle, one of the long-term employees at the Cash for Containers depot in Leanya. Kyle has been with the program since 2013, so over 12 years of continuous employment. He's a valued and respected team member whose dedication, reliability and enthusiasm embodies everything that the Container Deposit Scheme stands for. Kyle's story is a reminder that when we create inclusive employment opportunities, we don't just provide jobs, we build careers, confidence and community. Through his work at the depot, Kyle has gained independence, friendships and pride in knowing he is helping to protect the environment and inspire others, and Kyle's actually inspired me. Kyle's contribution over more than a decade is something we should all celebrate, and it shows how programs like the CDS and organisations like the Down Syndrome Association of the Northern Territory changes lives for the better. Madam Speaker, I also want to acknowledge the many community members, schools and local businesses that collect and donate containers to support the Down Syndrome Association NT and their Cash for Containers. Every bottle and can collected helps fund employment and it keeps the program running stronger. A special thank you to Top End Print, whose ongoing partnership provides merchandise that helps promote awareness and pride in the work that the Down Syndrome NT does. And I pay tribute to the mentors and supervisors at the Leanya Depot and within the Down Syndrome Association, the people who train, guide and encourage employees every day. Their patience, skills and compassion transform this depot from a workplace into a place of growth, belonging and empowerment. To each of you, thank you, and thank you for your remarkable difference you make. Madam Speaker, with the expansion of the deposit scheme, I want to encourage all Territory businesses, schools, sporting clubs and community organisations to start preparing now to collect the additional new containers that will soon be eligible for the refund. This is an opportunity to grow fundraising programs, strengthen community recycling and supports depots like Cash for Containers in Leanya by increasing the volume of containers being processed locally. By expanding their own collection efforts, businesses and communities groups can help ensure success of the reform while making a direct contribution to the environmental protection and inclusive employment. And of course, Madam Speaker, the bill supports every collection depot in the Northern Territory. Depots across the Territory will also see increased container volumes, improved business viability and greater opportunity to employ local people. This bill strengthens those enterprises and helps grow our local economy right across the Territory. Madam Speaker, the bill embodies the best public policy, delivering environmental, economic and social benefit to all. It reduces litter and landfill, supports businesses, community, empowers people through employment and inclusion, and every container returned, every depot strengthened and every job created makes the Northern Territory cleaner, stronger and fairer. Once again, I acknowledge the bipartisan support for this bill and its referral to the Legislative Scrutiny Committee without amendment. That reflects the quality of work behind it and our shared belief that good environmental policy and good social policy go hand in hand. Madam Speaker, in conclusion, the bill is practical, inclusive and forward-looking piece of legislation. It ensures fewer bottles in landfill, cleaner communities, stronger businesses and more employment, especially for Territorians living with a disability. Madam Speaker, I'd like to thank the Minister for Lands, Planning and Environment, Member for Breakland, for bringing forward this important amendment and commend the department staff who have worked tirelessly to prepare the bill. Their commitment to consultation, clarity and fairness has ensured that these reforms are practical, inclusive and build a strong engagement with industry and the community. This is good legislation, the kind that reflects both vision and careful work. It reflects the leadership of the Minister and the Department and the generosity of community donors, the partnerships of businesses like Top End Print and the commitment of mentors, families and employees such as Kyle, who remind us of the profound difference inclusive employment makes. And it challenges us all, government, businesses and community alike, to do more, collect more, recycle more and support those who make a stronger Territory. Madam Speaker, I commend the bill to the House.
Member for Nightcliff.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I welcome any expansion to Territorians' ability to recycle, so I wholeheartedly support this bill. The 10-cent container refund scheme has been a massive success in Australia, increasing participation in recycling and reducing litter and pollution across the country. The refund scheme encourages community members to recycle plastic waste that is pervasive when it enters our natural environment. Every container refunded is one less container in our creeks, streams, mangroves and on our beaches. There is a refund facility just outside my electorate, Tomma Recycling Centre, which contribute to the over 100 million containers in the 2022-23 financial year redeemed in the NT alone. And so that equals $10 million in refunds in the pockets of Territorians in one financial year alone and growing every year. and my own kids have recycled bottles there for pocket money, and we do enjoy going to that recycling centre. Get to pop them inside the little thing and it counts them up. It's actually quite fun for kids. Also a shout out, as we heard before, from another member about the Nightcliff Plastic Makers space, which is a really great space doing wonderful, creative and practical recycling and upcycling with plastic, as well as we heard, teaching the ethos of recycling to younger generations. Those that know me know that I am really concerned about the plastic crisis in our environment, particularly in our marine environment, and the effects of microplastics in our food chains and in our bodies. And that I do actually genuinely love picking up rubbish. We have a saying in my family, if you see it, bin it. Within reason, of course, and especially if you don't have, I have my own personal little grabber rubbish picking up hand, which is very helpful. Long before I was in this job, I've regularly picked up rubbish in public spaces. I just think it's a really practical, tangible way to make an impact on your environment. I sort of first became really conscious of particularly the impacts of litter in terms of our marine environment when I volunteered for Sea Shepherd many, many years ago. And I was out on a vessel in the middle of the Indian Ocean, so about halfway between Australia and India. So on the radar, at sea, you can see there's no land. You could not be more isolated. And standing on the bow of the deck, when you looked over, I couldn't count more than 5 seconds without seeing another bit of plastic float by. So you're in the most pristine marine environments, and the plastic in our oceans, and I have sailed over a lot of the planet, it is everywhere. And it was a devastating, devastating thing to see the impacts of plastics in our marine environment. So the debate on this bill is timely for me, and for just a moment, if you allow me to plug an event, because this month before the rain hits, I have been running a big Clean Up the Nightcliff Electorate event with multiple events across the electorate. We did a big one in the mangroves at Sunset Park at the start of the month, so thank you very much to all the volunteers that came. And you especially with the mangroves that act as the filtration system for our marine environment, and the amount of stuff that ends up in there, you get some pretty strange bits of rubbish. You pull out mattresses, computer parts, all kinds of things from the mangroves, which are really devastating to our fish nurseries and things like that. So the reason I'm running this now, this cleanup event, is because every bit of rubbish on our streets ends up in the ocean, and that's rubbish from all the suburbs. So all the suburbs, the rubbish goes into our drains, ends up in our coastal areas, and as a coastal electorate, we see the devastating impacts of that a lot on the Nightcliff foreshore. This Sunday, we're doing another cleanup at Chapman Road, if anyone wants to come and join. And on the 1st of November again, we're doing another cleanup at Nightcliff Swimming Beach. So this bill, it's good. It not only encourages individuals to do more for the environment, but it empowers one of the most active community groups that exercise this scheme, which is Down Syndrome Australia, who do phenomenal work in keeping our territory clean. So an expansion of this scheme increases Down syndrome abilities to fund itself, making their work more impactful and the territory a cleaner place. Recycling with refunding is a pivotal part of our circular economy, an ideal economic structure the territory should evolve to. Now, our economy is currently far from circular and it resembles more of a one-way street. Currently, for corporations, including political donors, but we can thank this scheme for helping us along our way to a sustainable economy. But also let me be clear that while I support this bill wholeheartedly, and I do, we must be honest about what it is and what it isn't. So the understanding and perception of recycling has changed over time. Recycling, really at its nut, is kind of like bailing water out from a boat while someone upstream keeps drilling holes in the hull. We can collect every bottle in the territory, but if big companies continue producing billions of single-use containers with no accountability, we're just running faster on a treadmill going nowhere. So the real solution isn't at the recycling centre, it's at the boardroom tables of beverage companies and packaging manufacturers. We need producer responsibility schemes. We need packaging reduction targets. We need to stop asking everyday Territorians to clean up a mess that many of them didn't make, while the corporations profiting from plastic face no consequences whatsoever. This scheme is important work, but let's not pretend that 10 cents per bottle is a substitute for holding big business accountable for the environment crisis they've created. So I'm in full support of this totally uncontroversial bill. The popularity of this scheme is unquestionable and its expansion is a no-brainer. So why on earth, Madam Speaker, did the government recommend this to a scrutiny committee? What is so controversial about recycling that taxpayers needed to fund MLAs and public servants to pore over every detail of this bill? the government cannot point to, there has been no public outcry that forced them to scrutinise this bill, unlike the outcry we saw with the Territory Coordinator, for example, which did not get scrutinised. Many other bills with enormous public pushback and expert criticism, such as the youth and bail reforms and the anti-discrimination changes, didn't even get a look in from the Scrutiny Committee. This government has it completely backwards. How does the treatment of 3-litre plastic bottles get more scrutiny than the treatment of our most vulnerable children? How does the treatment of bottle caps get more scrutiny than the treatment of the sacred sites of First Nations people? This isn't leadership, it's busy work. Controversial acts like arming transit officers are passed on urgency, but deciding if a big plastic bottle should be recycled or not is dissected into an inch of its life. If you ever need to ask yourself why Territorians constantly ridicule politicians, you don't have to look any further than this. If the government finds controversy in recycling bottles while missing it in bills that actually warrant security, then their priorities aren't just backwards, they're incomprehensible. Let me be clear, I love recycling. I want to see more of it. I want to change people's habits to reduce littering. I want to see corporations held to account for the plastic they create. The plastic problem is immense and devastating to our environment and to human health, and it still really receives far less attention and regulation from governments than it needs. But watching government members fall over themselves to congratulate the minister for this obvious, no-brainer, uncontroversial bill, a bill that for some inconceivable reason was sent to the Legislative Scrutiny Committee, while they sat in complete silence as we passed enormous, controversial bills with hugely negative impacts on Territorians, is ridiculous. The Scrutiny Committee exists for controversial legislation. It exists for bills that affect people's rights, their freedoms and their lives. Instead, this government runs scared from transparency and accountability, cherry-picking what it gets scrutinised based on political convenience rather than public interests. If this is the government's idea of priority setting, Territorians have every right to question whether anyone over there even knows what they're doing. I support this bill. I just wish I could support the process that brought it here. Thank you.
Member for Johnston.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I wasn't going to speak to this bill today. I had the opportunity to be on the Scrutiny Committee. I also support the bill, as we did in the committee. I also am a great champion of recycling. I agree with the points that have been raised by other members about concerns about this bill not going far enough. And I also just want to follow up on what the member for Nightcliff just said about my concerns about the referral of this bill to the Scrutiny Committee. I just want to remind the chamber that the functions of the Scrutiny Committee are very clear in the terms of reference. They refer to whether or not a bill has sufficient regard to the rights and liberties of individuals, whether it's consistent with principles of natural justice, whether it does not adversely affect rights and liberties or impose obligations retrospectively, whether it has sufficient regard to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander tradition. I can't see where any of that is in this bill. I feel like it's a waste of parliamentary resources, and for me, as everyone here knows, I was incredibly glad to see the return of the Scrutiny Committee. I'm incredibly concerned to see the way it is being used and not used by this government. So I'm not going to talk at length about the bill, however. I support the bill, but I did want to quickly comment on some of the things that were said in the chamber. Member for Blaine. I want to thank you for your political analysis, but I just do feel the need to correct it for the record. I'm speaking here not as a member of any political party, I'm speaking here as a student of history. The claim that socialists uniquely threaten free speech while free markets protect it ignores substantial evidence to the contrary. Major corporations routinely suppress speech that threatens their profits, whether it's through blacklisting workers who organise unions, pressuring platforms to remove criticism, or using legal threats to silence journalists. We see that over and over again. I can give you myriad of examples. Trump himself has...
Can you direct your comments through me too?
Yes, sorry, Madam Speaker. Trump himself has repeatedly called for revoking broadcast licences of news networks that have criticised him, suggesting opening up libel laws to sue unfavourable press, and praised authoritarian crackdowns on protesters. The marketplace of ideas doesn't function when a handful of billionaires own the megaphones. Historically, it was socialist and Labor movements that fought for the very free speech protections that we have today. The real threat to free expression comes not from any particular economic system, but from concentrated power itself, whether it's held by states or held by corporations. When a few tech CEOs can unilaterally ban a sitting president or algorithmically suppress entire viewpoints, that is not the free market protecting speech. It's unaccountable power shaping public discourse for private interests. And let's not forget that right here in the Champions of Free Speech in your own CLP, your Chief Minister routinely tells people that she doesn't want to listen to them if she doesn't like what they have to say, and if they don't like what this government is doing, then they should leave. Where is the freedom of speech in that?
Member for Karama.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And unlike previous speakers, I'm actually going to talk about the bill. I'm going to talk about the intent of the bill, because I think that's what we're here. Because I often hear we're here to pass good laws. Well, this is a good law, a very good law. And so I commend the Minister and his agency for all the work they've done for bringing this bill before us. And just as a bit of background, Madam Speaker, I've actually got a bit of a history and a bit of a passion about waste management technologies. And I'll refer people, if you want to get onto your Google, anyone, look up waste management technologies, opportunities for research and manufacturing in Australia by Brian O'Gallagher, published in 1990. And there's a copy at the National Library. And that was when I was with the Department of Industry and Technology in Canberra. And may I say, that particular book, they had to publish 3 times. It was so popular. And it was looking at research across the country. And the key focus I was trying to get, and the key message I was trying to get, is there's actually money to be made out of waste, because people were throwing things away and they didn't understand that there's actually a business opportunity with it. And I went through various initiatives, researchers and companies that were actually doing innovative stuff at the time. You probably wouldn't think they were innovative now, but they were at the time. And a key focus of that is recycling. Recycling is a practical environmental initiative, absolutely practical environmental initiative. And I suggest this is part of our government's philosophy when we look at the environment. We are absolutely committed to protecting the environment, but we're doing it in practical initiatives that people can get behind and do on the ground, not just theoretical, philosophies there trying to restrain us, but how can we get on the ground and keep the environment clean? And this fits into that broader recycling strategy. But I probably also need to go back to when my parents were around. Now, I think they were doing recycling, and I think we've lost it somewhere on the way there, and we've got into this throwaway, dispose everything, single use of commodities. And I actually agree with the member for Nightcliff. I think over-packaging and all those things are absolutely wrong, and we do need to minimise that. But let me go back to my father. He was a hard-working bricklayer, and he worked very hard, and he supported a family of 6 kids, and my mother was a wonderful mother who did just as much work at home herself, looking after everyone. But he'd come at the end of the week, he'd have these beer bottles, and they were the big bottles. Down in Victoria, they were the Abbott's Lager. You might have the, he couldn't afford Crown Lager or that. He'd have the Abbott's Lager, he'd have the Stout, or he might have the VB, maybe Foster's as it came on. But they got the big bottles. And you know what they did? They kept them. They put them up near the ward shed, and they'd stack them up. And I tell you what, after 6 months later, he'd have a heap and he'd take them up to the bottle-o and cash them in. Cash them in. And you know what that money went for? That went to pay for our school fees. And he used to come home and he said, I'm only drinking to put you guys to school. Now, Mum didn't believe all that, but that was his rationale. But it was true recycling. That's how they did it. And now, when I look around, people just throw things away. They smash things away. But I've also got to say, as you know, I was on the City of Darwin City Council. I was a big supporter and advocate that that council needed to do better in recycling. And I've heard the attributions to the Alice Springs Council doing glass recycling, magnificent. The City of Darwin didn't do glass recycling. They should have done it. I urge that they were big enough to think about getting a full glass recycling facility here. But, you know, oh no, we can't afford that, can't do that. I think they should. They need to get a really good 10-year plan, and how can we achieve that, and maybe then go out to the federal government, the NT government, and do it as a collective idea going forward. I think that would be a brilliant idea, and I hope that the City of Darwin take that up. But think about it. All those bottles, wine bottles, people were no use putting them in the yellow bin because we didn't have a recycling facility. They were actually them separating them when they came through. They had to take them out so they could take them out of the proper recycling stuff, particularly the green wine bottles, and put them into the landfill. It was better off, you were better off putting your wine bottles into the red bin, whereas people generally thought, oh no, glass goes into recycling. It's a natural thing for people to think. Well, this container deposit legislation really urges people to say, hey, you've got your wine bottles, you've got your milk bottles, anything up to 3 litres, you can keep your lids on, whatever, but you can get some money back. You can earn something out of this. Don't go smashing them up, don't go wasting them. And as the member for Blaine said, we're looking for incentives, and this really does move people along. So I see this as a fantastic opportunity. And I think when I look at my own electorate in Kerama, one of the biggest issues you find, and I walk every street, I go through all the parks, is the litter, the broken glass. I've got, and I'll refer to Mr. Dean White, who I call the unofficial mayor of Kerama. The number of times he sends me photos of bottles or smashed glass on footpaths or around bus stops, or other residents send me around the playgrounds. They say, can we get the council to clean this up because the kids can't go and play? We've got broken glass everywhere. And it is a major scourge in my electorate. Like others, I come into my own electorate at the Kerama shops and I'll see some smashed up broken bottles just out in the car park. I see cans and so on. I'll actually go out with a plastic bag and pick it up and put it away because it's just not right. I'll then report it to the store owners, but, you know, you've got to do your own thing sometimes. You've got to lead by example. And I've heard from the member of Drysdale and others, and certainly the member for Casuarina, they're out there, they're getting their hands dirty, they're doing the real thing. And I heard from the member for Nightcliff too, so I'll give tribute to that as well. It really is important, and those bus stops, and may I say, I thank the Minister for Transport. I've been able to get some bins beside some of those bus stops where we had a lot of rubbish put in. Hopefully now people actually say, oh, I don't have to just throw it under the seat and smash it. There's actually a bin there. We probably need to do a lot more on education and convincing people to actually use things. People have to take personal responsibility for their own actions, but it's a good start. But now we're actually generating a little bit of a driver as to, hey, there is some money in this. And I heard the member for Wanguri, and like her, the Down syndrome people come round. I've got it at my own house. They come in, they put the crates there, and you put your Coke cans there, whatever. Well, now I'll be able to give them wine bottles and everything else. And occasionally they'll get a few of those too after a couple of celebrations, I can tell you that. Particularly after we celebrated our 1 year in government. I thought that was a good reason to have a glass of wine. But they can make some money out of this. And it's not only them, it's the scouting groups. They can do it. It's really important that we think about all these things. We've got to incentivise it. And I take on board that we may look on a review of upping the price to 20 cents. I would support that too. It would only give more incentive. I think it's a fantastic idea. But the fact that we're actually moving to this, that we don't actually have to wait. We're going to have transition arrangements where you don't have to wait for the labels on the wine bottles for 2 years. They'll still take it. You can still earn it. There is a business to be made here. And finally, and I'm conscious of time, and I do want the Minister to have time to wrap up, but I heard the member for Arafura talking about remote areas. You've got to learn to service the remote areas. This legislation is for the whole of the territory, member for, through Madam Speaker, is for the whole of the territory. And being on a council myself, I know there are opportunities for local councils and local authorities to come up with innovative ways of saying, hey, you give us all your stuff, we can actually make money out of this. They can earn money for their own, and they can actually be the initiators of saying, yes, give us a collection point here, we'll refund you, we'll work out an arrangement how we can get it to a larger distribution point. That's a normal way of business. Government doesn't have to do it. The more we do it from the grassroots, the better. It really can be owned by everyone, and they feel empowered. So why I absolutely agree remote areas will need it, look at ways how we can facilitate that. That is what I think we should do, and I think all members, particularly our bush members, should be out there talking to their local councils and authorities saying, hey, have you ever thought of taking advantage of this? You can actually make money, increase your rate base. So I really do like that idea. Other benefits, of course, tourism. The number of litter down our highways and so on, if we can clean that up, it makes it all the better for tourism. Caravan parks can be a source of collection. You know, camping grounds can be a source of collection. There's money to be made. There is money to be made. And finally, I'll just go back. I understand some of the glass we're going to capture now will actually be crushed and then sent down to Adelaide. Now, that may be because that's where the processing plants for road bases and things like that. Now, I know we were doing a little bit in Alice Springs. I think as the volume gets going, we need to see if there's an opportunity of doing some of that here. Because if I go back to my own electorate, if we collected all the yellowtail bottles that I find around our parks and we crushed them up and put them in the road base, we could build a yellow brick road. And I'm telling you that. So, you know, this is the Dorothy from Oz, you know, she'd love it. But we do need to do it. I commend the bill. Recycling is fantastic. It is a business opportunity all round, and I do thank everyone, and I commend the bill.
In closing, Minister.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I do want to start just by thanking all the people who have contributed today and acknowledging Mr Jimmy Cocking, who's now in the gallery this evening, Madam Speaker, who I'm sure is very happy to see the Environment Protection Container Deposit Scheme legislation passing today. I do want to thank all those members who have spoken, and I want to thank the stakeholders that have provided their feedback on the bill to the Legislative Scrutiny Committee, and thank the committee for its inquiry into the bill. I also thank the many stakeholders who have provided feedback during consultation on the reforms, and I acknowledge the feedback that the reforms could have gone further by increasing the refund amount to 20 cents. I sincerely do take on notice what members have said in this chamber today about ensuring that that is moving with the times. This is a matter for future consideration. The Environment Protection Beverage Containers and Plastic Bags Act 2011 provides a platform for the Container Deposit Scheme to increase recycling. The scheme provides Territorians with access to a well-established network of collection depots and other collection points across the Northern Territory where empty containers can be exchanged for 10 cents each. And I think now is probably a good time to pick up on the member for Arafura's questions in regards to the Container Deposit Scheme applying across the Northern Territory and what happens in some of those remote communities, Madam Speaker. I do want to note that there are depots in Barunga, Borroloola and the East Arnhem region. Elliot, Mataranka, Jabiru, Kintore, Nullumboy, Tennant Creek, Wadeye, Yalara and Groot Island. But there was also speak from other members here today, Madam Speaker, about what local councils, community councils can do. And I know from my own experience, Madam Speaker, there are people who are currently working for remote councils in the central region that quite literally go to community members and say, I will pay you for you collecting those cans around the community, and then they essentially take those cans that have been collected, take it back to Alice Springs as part of their weekly traversing in and out of the major towns, and they are ensuring that local people who don't make it to town every week are still able to access this facility, this scheme. And I think that's a wonderful thing that some members of local community councils are taking it upon themselves to increase the effectiveness. And I would encourage all other councils, Madam Speaker, that if they're able to do the same, to get involved. While the success of the scheme is evident by over 1 billion beverage containers being recycled since 2012, the reforms in this bill recognise that the scheme can still be improved. The primary aim of this bill is to broaden and simplify the scope of containers in the Territory's container deposit scheme. The bill achieves this by expanding the scope of containers in the scheme to beverage containers of 3 litres or less in volume, and as a result, wine and spirit bottles, plain milk containers and larger juice containers and flavoured milk of 1 or more will now be included in the scheme. These additional types of containers will join other beverage containers already in the scheme, including for water, fruit and vegetable juices, soft drinks, sports, vitamin drinks, flavoured milk, pre-mixed alcohol spirit drinks, beer and non-glass wine containers. This will simplify the scheme for Territorians, making it easy to understand and participate in, and minimise unnecessary complexity and confusion. Soon, Territorians will no longer have to sort beverage containers based on the type of beverage that was in the container. Instead, the focus will simply be on the recyclability of the container, for example, aluminium, plastic and glass. Recycling helps keep empty cans, soft drink bottles and beer bottles out of landfill and litter, as other members have spoken to today, Madam Speaker. And over 100 million beverage containers returned by Territorians each year equates to about 400 containers per Territorian each year and 10 million in deposits redeemed each year. 100 million beverage containers also equates to almost 800 tonnes of aluminium, 800 tonnes of plastic and 3.5 tonnes of glass recovered for recycling through the scheme each year. In terms of improving recycling rates and the volume of high-value materials for recycling, it is estimated that expanding the scheme will increase recycling by a further 12 million containers per year. This means more valuable materials will be recovered, which will benefit the recycling industry, encouraging more infrastructure investment and jobs, including in those remote communities that have been spoken about today, Madam Speaker. Wine and spirit bottles have been in the Queensland container scheme since November of 2023, and as I said during the first reading of this bill, it is only a matter of time before other states follow the lead of Queensland and the Territory. New South Wales, South Australia and Western Australia have now publicly announced that they will be expanding their schemes to accept wine and spirit bottles and larger drink containers. The Department of Lands, Planning and Environment will continue to work closely with these jurisdictions and with impacted stakeholders in the year ahead. The bill responds to industry concerns by providing a 2-year transitional period from commencement to include the 10-cent refund marking on wine and spirit bottle labels. This will reduce the impact of the scheme's expansion on industry, noting that the Queensland, the 10-cent refund mark will need to be included on labels by January 2027. Furthermore, Australian Food Standards is mandating energy labelling on packaged alcohol beverages, which could be actioned by the industry at the same time as these reforms. More businesses are already updating their labels to meet Queensland's requirements by applying the nationally consistent 10-cent refund mark. Businesses complying with Queensland's labelling requirements will then be compliant with the Territory's requirements and will also be for New South Wales, South Australia and Western Australia when their reforms commence. As the shelf life and turnover of milk and juice containers is a lot shorter than wine and spirits, the bill provides a transitional period of up to 1 year to include the refund marking on labels for those types of containers being added to the scheme. The bill also requires collection depots to accept containers if lids, caps or other closures are attached. This change has strong community support and will enable Territorians to return containers to depots without having to remove the lid or cap from the container. And I've certainly been in that position, Madam Speaker, where you're furiously trying to remove all the caps after thinking you were doing the right thing by putting them back on top. The bill makes several administrative changes to improve the functioning of the scheme. Firstly, the bill transitions the powers and functions of the Northern Territory Environment Protection Authority to the Minister for Lands Planning and Environment, Chief Executive Officer and delegates of the Department of Lands, Planning and Environment. Secondly, the bill transfers the review of statutory decisions under the Act to the Northern Territory Civil and Administrative Tribunal. This enables affected people to apply to a tribunal for a review of a decision rather than the local court where this function presently sits. Thirdly, this bill makes a range of minor amendments to clarify matters and update the Act and regulations in line with modern drafting principles. These minor amendments do not impact the substantive operation of the Act and regulations or the scheme itself. The amendments to broaden the scope of the scheme will commence by Gazette notice, anticipated by mid-2026. This will allow sufficient time for businesses and industry to make the necessary adjustments and ensure Territorians continue to have a positive experience at collection depots. The other amendments will commence on the day after the Administrator's assent is declared. In summary, this bill helps to rebuild the economy by supporting the waste and recycling industry, encouraging grading investment in infrastructure and providing job opportunities across the Territory. The bill improves our outdoor lifestyle and protects our natural environment by removing litter and reducing landfill. Going to some of those comments, Madam Speaker, earlier, just before I wrap up, because I was actually quite taken aback by all the contributions here today, I do want to note also the questions that were asked in regards to why the responsibilities under the Act are being moved from the NTEPA to the Minister and the Department. The changes are consistent with existing delegations and will create efficiencies by more appropriately placing responsibility for administering the scheme with the Department rather than the NTEPA. And there was also questions raised about the implications of transferring to the reviews to NTCAT. And I just want to note to members there have been no reviews before the local court and we are not expecting resourcing burdens through the Northern Territory Civil and Administrative Tribunal. The member for Goyder, in his speech, Madam Speaker, spoke about collecting rubbish, something that I know I also enjoy getting out and doing in my community. And I want to commend the Clontarf Academy in Alice Springs, who every year around Clean Up Australia Day get out with the Mayor of the Alice Springs Town Council, and I've certainly been there for the last 5 years, collecting containers in the Todd River in Alice Springs. And what I've noticed over my time of collecting containers is that we have seen people definitely collecting and ensuring that the aluminium cans are collected, but every year I see an increasing amount of spirit bottles left in the Todd River because you cannot currently get a refund for those. And I'm extremely excited to see, hopefully, a reduction in those containers being left in our environment as a result of these scheme changes. Member for Drysdale spoke about David Attenborough and Captain Planet. I too, Madam Speaker, was someone that as a young person watched Captain Planet and can certainly understand the impact that has on many people that watched it. He also spoke about being the change you wish to see, Madam Speaker, and it did make me think about, with my own daughter, if ever we are walking down the street and I see any of my children kick rubbish, I always say, if you can kick it, Madam Speaker, you can pick it up, and that is certainly words that we live by. The member for 𝙏𝙈𝙈𝙀𝙎 spoke about Carl Hampton and the Alice Springs Town Council, who did bring in that very effective wine bottle scheme that essentially was closing the gap themselves during that time. And I did have a little chuckle to myself researching the history around that, Madam Speaker, and Jerry Wood, who was spoken about earlier on in this debate, actually released a media release stating exactly that the Northern Territory Government, this was in 2012, Madam Speaker, so we're some 13 years down the track, needed to get on and ensure that this gap in the scheme was dealt with. And I'm glad to say, hopefully Jerry is listening in today, that we are dealing with that as we speak today. The member for Blaine spoke, amongst other things, about our bowerbird instincts. I found that very amusing, being my father being a twitcher, a bird watcher himself, and we would often see the bowerbirds collecting things. And I myself now, Madam Speaker, as I deliver mail around the electorate, have actually strapped a milk crate onto the back of my bike, and I've, in 2 weeks, have collected 67 cans purely by just picking them up as I ride past them on the footpath. And it's something that unfortunately is becoming an issue again in our community, which is why schemes like this are so important. We need to ensure that the rubbish that is often left by others is collected. The member for Wanguri spoke about the benefits of the employment through the scheme, especially for community organisations. The member for Nightcliff spoke about picking up rubbish and the environment. The member for Johnson, thank you for your contribution. The member for Karama, I did enjoy the quote that the father working extremely hard to provide for those school fees, Madam Speaker, and recycle those glass bottles. And it's been wonderful to listen to everyone, I guess, speak to how this scheme impacts themselves. I would also like to finalise my comments by acknowledging the Office of Parliamentary Counsel for their work in drafting the bill and modernising the legislation, and the officers and departments of Lands Planning Environment who contributed to the development of this bill. I also acknowledge the hard work of the recycling industry. And finally, I want to thank Territorians for their strong support in making the Territory's Container Deposit Scheme a success. To the many Territorians who have embraced the scheme and have invested their time collecting containers and visiting depots to redeem deposits, thank you. Madam Speaker, I commend the bill to the Assembly.
The question is the bill be now read a second time. Those of that opinion say aye. To the contrary, no. Aye. I think the ayes have it. The clerk.
A bill for an act to amend the Environment Protection Beverage Containers and Plastic Bags Act 2011 and the Environment Protection Beverage Containers and Plastic Bags Regulation 2011.
Minister.
Madam Speaker, I seek leave to move the third reading.
Is leave granted? Leave is granted. There be no objection. Minister.
Madam Speaker, I move that the bill now be read a third time.
The question is that the bill be now read a third time. Those that opinion say aye. To the contrary, no. Aye. I think the ayes have it. The clerk.
A bill for an act to amend the Environment Protection Beverage Containers and Plastic Bags Act 2011 and the Environment Protection Beverage Containers and Plastic Bags Regulations 2011.
Timed perfectly. We will now suspend for lunch. The Assembly stands suspended until 2 p.m. A meeting of the Public Accounts Committee will be held at 12 noon in the Litchfield Room. See you at 2 p.m. for question time.